Okay, guys, I would be moving on from this topic, and I hope this will be my last commentary on this, but I think that the Mark Lamont Hill firing from CNN, it is important. It is important to have freedom of speech in media, even if it's the freedom of speech of people you disagree with. And this weekend, there was the Kyler Murray controversy with Oklahoma. It's baffling that anybody would ever care about what a 15-year-old had said and then still care about it maybe 5 years later when he's a college junior, sophomore, whatever Kyler Murray is. It's ridiculous. Well, they didn't care about it when he was just a 15-year-old. So they only care about it now that he's achieved fame and success as a college football quarterback. The same thing you could say about Kevin Hart. I don't know if I really have anything, that I admire Kevin Hart for in terms of his political beliefs, if he even has any. But to host the Oscars, I don't think you need to be some sort of deep philosophical thinker or even someone who is, that has this real gift for knowing what to say at the right moment in order to avoid embarrassment. That's not what comedy is about. I remember it must have been 7 or 8 years ago that Ricky Gervais hosted the Oscars, and or it might have been the Grammys, actually. I'm pretty sure it was the Grammys. Ricky Gervais hosted it. He actually offended a lot of people. Offended Jordan Sparks and the Jonas Brothers. He was making a lot of jokes about chastity vows and stuff like that. And people have the right to be offended, but in the end, Ricky Gervais didn't hurt anybody. And I think that the show goes on. But what's interesting is to see not really how many people are defending Mark Lamont Hill when they don't defend other people saying things that may be offensive, but exactly how ignorant they end up revealing themselves to be in their defense of somebody who said something that Mark Lamont Hill in his entire speech, people focused on the things that were most offensive. They didn't focus on the things that aren't true. They didn't focus on the lies. They didn't focus on Mark Lamont Hill's demagoguery, okay, which is that's really what I have an issue with, people lying. I have an issue with people being dishonest about certain topics. Okay, that's where I take issue with something, and I don't believe in censorship. I believe in using it in order to give more information for the public and encourage public debate. So this is Roland Martin and his crew of other outcasts who are basically commenting on this. Roland Martin himself, I believe, had some sort of controversy with freedom of speech, getting fired for saying something off the cuff. It might be that he's paying back Mark Lamont Hill with a solid or something.
All right, folks, Dr. Mark Lamont Hill, of course, longtime commentator at CNN. He is out, fired today as a result of a speech that he gave at the United Nations in support of the Palestinian people. Mediaite is reporting that CNN, this is the quote from them, Mark Lamont Hill is no longer under contract with CNN. According to their story, Hill, and here we go to my iPad, please, Hill urged countries to boycott Israel in a speech on Wednesday calling for a free Palestine from the river to the sea. It is that comment that a Jewish organization seized on. They say that is a phrase that has been used by Hamas as well as other anti-Israel terror groups. The phrase from the river to the sea. It implies, according to this story, the phrase implies the replacement of Israel by a Palestine stretching from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea. Mark Lamont Hill disputes the characterization of his comments. This is what they have here, down here. He says, quote, I support Palestinian freedom. I support Palestinian self-determination. I am deeply critical of Israeli policy and practice. I do not support anti-Semitism, killing Jewish people, or any of the other things attributed to my speech. I have spent my life fighting these things. He also then tweeted, my reference to river to the sea was not a call to destroy anything or anyone. It was a call for justice, both in Israel and in the West Bank, Gaza. The speech very clearly and specifically said those things. No amount of debate will change what I actually said or what I meant. He then said this isn't a case.
So after he got basically blasted by a lot of his critics on Twitter for the speech, and then eventually forced off of CNN. During the course of that, I think it was like a day or so, he was fighting back against these people on Twitter. And the truth is that Mark Lamont Hill is a liar. And if he would have actually stood his ground and said, you know what, I did agree with the opinions of certain people, and that's basically what I'm saying. But it's very difficult for him to make that a palatable opinion for the broader public, because the fact is that from the river to the sea is a well-known expression. It wasn't he can put whatever spin he wants on it. But the fact is that when other people use phrases that may or may not be charged from previous periods of history, people on the left, like Mark Lamont Hill, have no problem calling it dog whistling. You know, America First, for example, has been used in the past by groups that have prejudice. You could look at Make America Great Again. They constantly talk about how that is a racist line, and they always claim, well, it's not really, it really means Make America White Again. Well, that's you reading into it something. So why are you getting bent out of shape when somebody reads into something you said, something that you claim that you didn't say? Well, you're not the first person to use it. So sometimes you just have to be more courageous than you are in your own mind. And that's not what he was. He was trying to pretend that he meant something else.
Throwing rocks and hiding hands. I genuinely believe in the arguments and principles that I shared in the speech. I also genuinely want peace, freedom, and security for everyone. These are not competing ideals and values. And
so he says that this isn't a case of throwing rocks and hiding hands, but that's exactly what he did. His speech, you know, when you're an activist, your speeches are meant to be provocative. Okay, that's the goal. You know, it's a legitimate goal in many cases. Sometimes you take shit for the things that you believe in. And Mark Lamont Hill believed in something, and he still believes in it. And then he says, well, I don't want any repercussions for what I said. And I don't believe that the repercussions were justified. I've said it before that CNN should not have fired him. And that in reality, it doesn't really improve the image of CNN anyway, because CNN is a joke network. Within a day, they do something more ridiculous than anything that they've done before. So who cares if they fire Mark Lamont Hill or keep him? However, in addition to that, once they do fire him, who do you think is blamed for his firing? The people who, you know, the advocates, the pro-Israel advocates who called for his firing. So they are basically allowing themselves to be painted into the corner of being anti-free speech bullies. And it's the dumbest game in the world. You have them basically creating out of Mark Lamont Hill a freedom of speech bully who hates freedom of speech. They've turned him into a freedom of speech symbol. And that's really what the problem is here.
So here is a portion of his speech. I'm going to go to it where he talked about it. So I read some of that. And then he later said in his speech, which we're trying to get some video, he says, contrary to Western mythology, black resistance to American apartheid did not come purely through Gandhi and nonviolence. Rather, slave revolts and self-defense and tactics otherwise divergent from Dr. King or Mahatma Gandhi were equally important to preserving safety and attaining freedom. If we are to operate in true solidarity with the Palestinian people, we must allow the Palestinian people the same range of opportunity and political possibility. If we are standing in solidarity with the Palestinian people, we must recognize the right of an occupied people to defend itself. We must prioritize peace, but we must not romanticize or fetishize it. We must advocate and promote nonviolence at every opportunity, but we cannot endorse a narrow politics of respectability that shames Palestinians for resisting, for refusing to do nothing in the face of state violence and ethnic cleansing. And again, as I said, he is, of course, a longtime professor at several universities, author as well, has been a longtime supporter of the Palestinian people. And again, as a result of that speech to the UN on yesterday, CNN has chosen to fire Mark Lamont Hill. I did see them.
So up till now, you know, I don't think that typically I criticize Roland Martin because he's ridiculous. He is a clown. And in fact, he looks like the Georgia Bulldogs mascot. You know, I'll just pull him up for a second. You can compare the two. So, I mean, there's some resemblance. Okay, you got that, and you got this, you got that. One of them's a little happier because Roland Martin. Well, in this photo, you have a little stronger resemblance. But in any case, he was fired in 2012. Again, happier times was when he. I mean, you can see he's got better fashion too. Now he's kind of wearing some sort of zip-up sweatshirt of some sort. You know, I shouldn't make fun of the way people dress. I am sitting here dressing an Isaiah Thomas T-shirt, so I guess I'm one to talk. But in any case, Roland Martin responds to Glad's accusations of homophobic comments. So on Super Bowl Sunday, Roland Martin, a commentator for CNN, sent out a controversial tweet that resulted in GLAAD, Gay Lesbian Alliance Against Defamation, demanding his removal from the news network. Who cares? You know what? I would have been fine with him staying anyway. I don't care because he's an idiot. After an H&M commercial featuring a scantily clad David Beckham aired, Martin wrote on Twitter, if a dude at your Super Bowl party is hyped about David Beckham's H&M underwear ad, smack the ish out of him. I remember this now. Almost immediately, GLAAD picked up on the tweet and demanded that Martin be fired from CNN, where he appears as a commentator. On Monday, Martin issued a statement defending his comments, which he said were against soccer fans and not gay men. That was a nice deflection. I mean, it is a bit dishonest, but that was pretty funny. Fam, let me address the issue that some of the LGBT community have raised regarding some of my Super Bowl tweets yesterday. I made several cracks about soccer, as I do all the time. I was not referring to sexuality directly or indirectly regarding the David Beckham ad, and I'm sorry folks took it otherwise, he said in a statement. And, you know, I think it's funny. I think it's a funny joke, and I don't think he should have been fired. I think otherwise he is kind of a clown.
Text message to see if he will come on the show to give us his thoughts about being fired from CNN and his speech. Had not heard back from him, though. Right now I want to go to my panel. Michael Brown, former chair of the DNC Finance Committee, and Julianne Malveaux, of course, economist, president emerita of Bennett College. Also Malik Abdul with the Conservative Federation. What's up, folks?
Hey, how you doing?
So let's talk about this because here's the deal.
Okay. So is he standing to the right?
There have been a number of people over the last several years, even entertainers, who have been calling for folks to boycott performing in Israel as a result of what's happening with the Palestinian people. Many have criticized them for canceling concerts. We saw Ron DeSantis in the gubernatorial election rip into the Dream Defenders because they have the same position as Mark Lamont Hill on this. And so, your thoughts on this idea that because he said, and I'm going to go back to the quote here, from the sea from the comment, I got it, guys, from the river to the sea. Mm-hmm. So you need to tell me, so what, those 6 words?
You know, Roland, the thing about it is anytime anyone is even slightly critical of Israel, we're then accused of being anti-Semitic. I say...
Okay, so she's a former president, or she is a president of Bennett College, which I think is in Georgia. Let me check here. So she's going off on a rant.
If you are a human rights activist, then what's happening to the Palestinian people is simply wrong. And if you take it in
it's in Greensboro, North Carolina. Sorry about that.
terms of historical context, remember that Israel was created out of Palestinian land. Guess where they were going to put it first? Uganda. The initial plan was to put Israel, they will snatch some black people land, but you know, those Maasai were not having that. And so,
Okay, so I am not offended in the least by what she said. I just want to tell you that the woman who is the president of Bennett College, okay, I'm going to send this to a couple friends of mine, believes that the Maasai people of Uganda are the ones that objected and torpedoed the Uganda plan. Now, let's hear her, and you know, I'll bring up some more facts at the end.
But that was the initial plan, was to create a Jewish homeland on the African continent. Now, this was way back in 1948. I ain't that old, but I did study it. But in any case, it's just interesting contextually that Israel has come. They have encroached land from the initial space. Jewish people certainly have a right to live, to survive, and to thrive, but not at the expense of other people who they run off their land. And so I don't think that Mark Lamont Hill said anything that was especially egregious, but I do think that we're in a climate, especially given the amount of anti-Semitism that we're experiencing, is we're in a climate where there are challenges.
So Malik, the question does beg.
Okay, so before we go on, what many people don't know about is that so this is from History Central. Okay, they are one website. I will try to find a different one that will be a little more sourced. But there was originally an idea back in the early 1900s that the British Empire would establish a Jewish homeland because at the time, there was a lot of violent attacks against Jewish towns in Eastern Europe, especially in Poland, in Ukraine, probably would be the worst, Russia to some extent, parts of the Baltic states. And you know that this was chronic. This was something this is the anti-Semitism that the left acknowledges. Because there was genuinely a historical religious beef between Christian sects of the time, the Orthodox Church in Ukraine and various Catholic countries, and the Jews. They didn't like them. Okay, they despised them for all sorts of theological reasons, sometimes for other reasons related to blood libels and things like that. I don't think we're here to litigate it. We're here to talk about the Uganda Plan. The Uganda Plan was hatched because there were many British statesmen that were colonizing Africa back in the 19th century and on into the 20th century. And one of the ideas, in order to help it become more and more institutionalized, keep the colonies basically more British and given to administration, was to introduce new peoples into the continent that would be kind of a buffer between the British overlords and the indigenous peoples. And it wasn't the Jews who were typically the case. Ironically, those of you that don't know, Uganda, so say bye to Russ, the Georgia Bulldogs mascot. So there were South Asians in Uganda up until the 1970s. Those that don't know, so they, in 1972, I believe, all of the South Asian immigrants were basically banished from Uganda. But how had they gotten there to begin with? Well, South Asia, as you know, which are Sri Lanka, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, was controlled by the British Empire at the time. And the British found that it would be, kind of advantageous to them to often kind of mix those colonial possessions and use them against one another. So the Indian peoples of the subcontinent, whether they be Muslim or Sikh, or Hindu, obviously. The Hindu religion, I think, is the largest in historical British India. They would be shipped across the world to places like Guyana, all over the world, and they basically work originally as laborers, and then in many cases they ended up working their way up to being part of the social elite. Especially in some of those countries like Guyana and Trinidad, that for many years they had a lot of influence over the country's leadership. Many times they would intermarry with some of the local peoples or other peoples that were basically brought in, African peoples. So that was a common policy of the British throughout their colonial rule, not just in Uganda, but throughout the British Empire. This has nothing to do with Zionism. The only nexus between Zionism and this whole colonization scheme was the fact that there was a plan with respect to Uganda to bring a lot of Jews into there for a brief period. Well, let's read into that. In a meeting on April 23rd, 1903, with the Colonial Secretary of Great Britain, Joseph Chamberlain stated that in his opinion, Uganda and East Africa seemed an ideal location for the resettlement of Jews. At first, Herzl ignored the suggestion, fearing that it would endanger his negotiations for the establishment of a Jewish protectorate in Sinai. When his plan fell through, Herzl pursued Chamberlain's offer. In August 1903, Herzl received a letter written by Sir Clement Hill, superintendent of African protectorates, indicating Great Britain's willingness to consider Jewish settlement. Excuse me. I can't even find my place now. To consider Jewish settlement in East Africa. Hill stated that this settlement could be politically independent, with a Jewish governor and a Jewish administration. At the 6th Congress, Herzl presented a summary of his negotiations with the British. Herzl claimed that the Congress should not reject the plan, but should investigate it, as it was a legitimate offer from the British Empire, an offer which conferred upon Zionism an important stamp of approval and legitimacy. The reaction of the Congress delegates was heated. Many threatened to withdraw, and the Russian delegation did, in fact, walk out of the Congress for a number of hours. While the Congress voted by majority to impanel a commission to investigate the British offer, it was apparent that acceptance of the offer would undermine the Zionist movement. Herzl died 10 months later. At the next Congress, the commission reported back that Uganda was not suitable for Jewish settlement. So it had nothing to do. What she said was that the Maasai was the reason that these people that this was rejected. Now this is from Haaretz, and we'll get to the Maasai in a second. A student angry over the proposal to set up a Jewish national homeland in Africa narrowly missed Max Nordau. Nordau was a very famous, symbolic Zionist at the time. You know, he was one of the early Zionists of the late 19th and 20th century. This is the real Zionist movement. This isn't the one that people use rhetorically in whatever propaganda you're talking about. This is the one that openly was, recruiting people back in the early 19th or the early 20th century, rather. On the evening of December 19, 1903, a Hanukkah ball in Paris was interrupted by gunshots as a young man opened fire on Zionist luminary Max Nordau. Nordau was not hit by the bullets, although a bystander was grazed by a shot. As he took aim at the 54-year-old Nordau, the shooter, a 27-year-old student of Russian origin named Chaim Zelig Luban, apparently shouted, "Death to Nordau," the East African. At the time, the meaning of the cry was well understood. The Zionist movement was racked by a bitter controversy over Theodor Herzl's recommendation that it consider a proposal by the British government to set up a temporary national home in British Africa in what is today actually part of Kenya, though it has always been referred to as the Uganda Plan. The idea was raised at the 6th Zionist Congress held in Basel in August 1903, and although it met with fierce opposition from many members, the Congress did vote to have an exploratory committee visit the proposed plot of land the following year. Particularly opposed to the idea was the delegation from Russia, whose members would not consider any alternative, even a temporary one, to a Jewish home in Palestine. Nordau, oh my God, what a beard, was then the second most important figure in the Zionist leadership. Born in Pest, Hungary. That, by the way, Pest is just the part of the city of Budapest. So, I love those names. He had grown up in an Orthodox family, but by the time he was a young man, so this is just the background on him. Out of loyalty to Herzl, Nordau had supported the idea of sending a team to visit Africa when it was raised at the Zionist Congress. He referred to Africa as a Nachteisel, a night shelter in German, or temporary refuge, but he was never truly in favor of the Uganda alternative, nor did he expect it to come to pass. So that's about it. They don't mention anything else about the plan. The plan was pretty much never got off the ground. Okay, and the Maasai are from Kenya. They're not from anywhere in Uganda. For those of you that don't know, let me look up I don't know how many people there are. So the Maasai are only about 2 million people. And, that's 2 million today. So that's very important. People have to understand that these are 2 million people today. So back then, they were probably in the hundreds of thousands, 100 years ago. So she doesn't know what the hell she's talking about. It's not even in Uganda. Uganda is right over here. Now, apparently, it seems that the tract of land was somewhere in this area, which might have been in Kenya, not in Uganda. But she said Uganda anyway, so that would lead you to believe that she thought that the Maasai live in Uganda, but they don't. They live somewhat close to it, but not at all. And actually, it says here that there's only about 500,000 people that are Maasai. So there's not that many of them, and this has nothing to do with the Uganda plan. And in fact, the ethnicities of Uganda are the following. Those of you that might have read, I used to read about this during, especially the Amin era. People think about Idi Amin, who was the famous dictator of Uganda. Great movie, by the way, Last King of Scotland with Forrest Whitaker. You should watch. Very nice film. I don't know if the word is nice, but it's very well made. There's some disturbing parts, but that's about the dictator Idi Amin. And I started to read about Uganda back in the day, and the largest ethnic group is the Baganda. And those of you that will read a little bit more into it, the nation of Uganda came from the name of the ethnic kingdom, Buganda, which is pretty much here we can even look it up. So you see this is the area that is Buganda. There's a number of other ancient kingdoms of Uganda sitting around it. So people need to know really that when you talk about these countries, they're kind of patchworks of ethnic groups. And then you see a number of other ones, the Langi, the Akole. Those are groups that, in essence, those make up Uganda, but not the Maasai. So she doesn't know what the hell she's talking about.
Can somebody speak their thoughts that disagree with Israel and not be anti-Semitic? Can you disagree with what the Israelis do?
Hey, well, I'm the Republican on the panel, so as far as...
what does that mean?
The idea that people should be able to say things that others can misconstrue. In this particular case, we have the Jewish community. The Jewish community, they're the ones who's saying that his comments were anti-Semitic. We can debate whether or not they were. I don't think that they were.
So, I don't know, it's frozen again.
Roland, the thing about the continent, where there are challenges.
So Malik, the question does beg, can somebody speak their thoughts that disagree with Israel and not be anti-Semitic? Can you disagree with what the Israelis do?
Yeah, this internet's really screwing you, man.
That people should be able to say things that others can misconstrue. In this particular case, we have the Jewish community. The Jewish community, they're the ones who's saying that his comments were anti-Semitic. We can debate whether or not they were. I don't think that they were.
Do you agree with me?
Well, of course. I'm sure I agree with you on a lot of things. But Mark Lamont Hill will be allowed to defend himself. Mark Lamont Hill will be given the benefit of the doubt that what he said was not anti-Semitic. Unfortunately, we live in a climate that does not allow that for for Republicans in general, but particularly black conservatives. I give him the benefit of the doubt that what he said was not anti-Semitic, in the same way that I give that same benefit of the doubt to Cindy Hyde-Smith.
Oh, please.
So she doesn't have the integrity. Somebody who just told a bit of historical fiction talking about the Maasai keeping the Zionists out of Uganda. But she wants to have an issue. She takes issue with him, claiming that, I believe in Mark Lamont Hill's freedom of speech. I also believe I'm entitled to freedom of speech. I also believe that Cindy Hyde-Smith is entitled to freedom of speech. She takes issue with that. That's why this is a person, remember, She is the president of an institution of higher education, Bennett College.
So again, Mike Brown, when you see this, when you heard what I read his speech, and again, they're saying from the river to the sea that's anti-Semitic, and again, CNN hasn't said exactly why they fired him, but clearly the criticism against his comments is the reason.
Yeah, I don't know if I can put my toe into the debate on whether the comment was anti-Semitic or not. However, I want to stop what the doctor was talking about and co-sign with what she was talking about. In the environment we're in, everything you say has to be thought about. You have to think about it. It's a different time now, whether we like it or not. And
So he has on the panel the former vice chair of the DNC Finance Committee. He has on the panel also, this HBCU chairwoman and a black Republican. I think Roland Martin, if we're gonna just judge by the show, it's not like he made it unfair here. I think he did the best job that he could here, and I don't really blame him. I think it was one of his guests that was the biggest. She's out of her mind.
Everything you say, everything you tweet, everything you email to a friend can be construed as something, and somebody may not like it. So in this environment, whether right or wrong, you got to, kind of deal with the consequences of that. Now, again, I am not saying whether right or wrong, because I don't know, and we'd have to have a further conversation whether those 6 words meant what they mean to other people and whether they were offensive or not. But clearly to some folks at CNN, they were.
So the pro-Israeli faction, anything you say that's pro-Palestinian is considered anti-Semitic. And that's problematic to me. I mean, Palestinian people are human beings also. I mean, people have lost their homes, their livelihoods, everything. And because, of course, no one likes anti-Semitism, everyone recoils from the Holocaust. But that doesn't mean that Palestinian people do not have rights. And on the other hand, you and I are going to have a conversation later about the little Klan woman.
So again, she makes a false assertion, not about the Israel, the Israel issue is secondary to what we're talking about. This is a woman who runs an institution of higher learning. And she's basically, first of all, she claims that the Maasai scared the Zionists out of Uganda when they tried to take it over, which is not the case because they don't live in Uganda. And now she's saying that Cindy Hyde-Smith was in the Klan, which she wasn't.
In Mississippi.
So again, hopefully Mark will hit back to me. We'd love to have him on the show to talk more about this, and so we'll have that for you. You want to support Roland Martin Unfiltered?
No, I don't want to support you. Yeah, I think that, look, it's enough to talk about Mark Lamont Hill as an example of somebody who said something that deserves to be heard and criticized. It's another thing to use his example in order to peddle bullcrap that has nothing to do with what actually happened. The Uganda plan had nothing to do with the Maasai people of Uganda. The Zionist movement largely rejected it. They didn't want to do it. It is one of those often used myths in order to portray Zionism as a much more important movement than it is. Zionism as a movement really just concerns the desire for a homeland for the Jewish people. What people want it to be is this grand conspiracy of all of these different global leaders and whatever that are going to kind of trick the rest of the world, the underlings, the downtrodden, into giving up all of their rights. And that's simply, if you go back, you research it, you look through what happened and the exact goings on of those events, you can't you can't find evidence of it. Now, if somebody can produce evidence of the Uganda plan being as she portrayed it, I'm fully willing to entertain it. That's about it. Please like this video, subscribe to the channel, share the video. Also, please subscribe to me on BitChute and my other channel, Razor Ray Live Wounds. And I will also be live streaming again, possibly on Wednesday on Halsey News. Also, possibly on Thursday on this channel. Going to have a little debate, trying to set it up concerning something in South Asia. So let's talk about it later. And please have a great night and a great Tuesday.